YouTube. This is Monica Rhodes chiming in to say Happy Black History Month 2023. It's an amazing month and one that we should all be celebrating. As we celebrate Black History Month, it's important to take note of what we've done as a nation to preserve and protect the legacy of African Americans on our landscape. These wins for public lands, historic places, and the nation were supported by both sides of the aisle, demonstrating what we've always known: preservation and national parks are truly bipartisan. At the end of last year, President Biden signed into law the $1.7 trillion omnibus bill funding the federal government. The bill funds the National Park Service at $3.5 billion, which is a $210 million increase over fiscal year 2022. This funding restores the 500 of the 3,000 staff positions lost over the last decade, which is a huge win for my Park Service friends who work hard every single day to keep up with the increased visitation to our national parks. Here are a few provisions included in this bill. First, let's talk about national heritage areas. And I know that we all know what they are, but just as a reminder, national heritage areas are designated by Congress as places where natural, cultural, and historic resources combine to form a cohesive, nationally important landscape. Through their resources, heritage areas are nationally important stories that celebrate our nation's diverse history. So in a way, national heritage areas are living landscapes. So consequently, they need collaboration, and they do so through communities and with communities to determine how to make heritage relevant to local interests and needs. So here are a few that have been added with the passage of this bill. But first, St. Croix National Heritage Area in the Virgin Islands. In addition to this heritage area being added to the list of the over 50 in the nation, there will also be a commemorative plaque to acknowledge the slave rebellion that began on St. John's Island on November 23, 1733. This was led by Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett. Second, the Bronzeville-Black Metropolis National Heritage Area was designated for the purpose of interpreting the distinctive landscape, history, and culture of Chicago's Black metropolis and the story of the Great Migration. Some of the house museums that are included within the boundary of the heritage area are Muddy Waters and Mamie Tia Mobley's house, along with the Ida B. Wells Monument and the Forum, along with Robert Temple's church, the place where the funeral of Emmett Till was held. And this was led by Representative Bobby Rush. Up next is the Alabama Black Belt National Heritage Area, which was designated for the purpose of conserving and interpreting sites and stories central to the American Civil Rights Movement. Within the 19 counties of the state of Alabama, this was a huge lift for Congresswoman Terry Sewell and all of the communities that were involved. So here's something else. Over the course of my career, I've helped to preserve cemeteries across the country and was very proud to see the African American Burial Grounds Preservation Program. Now, there's a whole story connected to this, and maybe I'll do it, but I'm just happy to see that it passed. This program will provide grants to organizations that want to preserve, restore, and interpret African American burial grounds in the country. The National Park Service is now authorized to make $3 million in grants annually between 2023 and 2027. And this effort was led by Congresswoman Alma Adams and the late Representative Donald McEachin and Brian Fitzpatrick. A few years back, I remember reading the feasibility study for this new national park. So the purpose of feasibility studies, and they're directed by Congress, is to evaluate the national significance of a site, along with the suitability and feasibility of adding it to the national park system. So I'm very excited to see the 124-acre New Philadelphia National Historic Site in Illinois, which is established to protect, preserve, and interpret the historic resources associated with the town of New Philadelphia. which was the first town in the United States planned and legally registered by a free African American before the Civil War. And this effort was led by Congressman Darren LaHood. This bill also calls for a number of Park Service studies to determine the feasibility of establishing even more national parks in the park system. One of which is focusing on recognizing a Black agricultural settlement founded by Oliver Toussaint Jackson in Weld County, Colorado. In 1910, Jackson formed the Negro Town Site and Land Company, and he used his political connections and drew on inspiration from Booker T. Washington's work on self-help. The Town Site Company didn't do as well, but Jackson still persisted, and he founded Deerfield in 1911. This effort is spearheaded by Congressman Joe Neguse and Congressman Ken Buck. So overall, big picture, there's $205 million for the Historic Preservation Fund, which is an increase of $32 million over last year. Within this amount, this bill includes $62 million for state historic preservation offices and tribal offices, $30 million in competitive grants to preserve sites and stories of underrepresented communities in civil rights heritage, and $11 million in grants for historically Black colleges and universities. Something else, Pullman National Monument, which was designated under President Obama in 2015, has been renamed to Pullman National Historical Park. So there are two ways national parks are created. One is through an act of Congress, and the other is through presidential powers under the Antiquities Act of 1906. As a National Historical Park, Pullman will now be able to acquire land and enter into cooperative agreements to advance park management. Of course, we all know the story of the Pullman Porter, so I won't go there, but this effort was led by U.S. Representative Robin Kelly. Here are a few other things that have been added in. There are now $600 million to address water issues in Jackson, Mississippi. This bill also establishes the Japanese American World War II History Network, which is designed to interconnect sites across the country related to mass incarceration of Japanese Americans and to increase the recognition of this human rights tragedy which occurred on U.S. soil during World War II. And this was sponsored by Congressman J. Arbernolti. That's about it for now. There's so much more in that bill, but those are a few highlights that I thought would be significant as we are celebrating Black History and Heritage Month. Not to mention the fact that Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History, Negro History Week, which later became Black History Month, his home is there in Washington, D.C., and also a part of the National Park Service unit. So all in all, this has been a tremendous win for Black heritage and something that we should all be celebrating, this bipartisan effort in our nation's history, and certainly see the importance of telling all of the chapters for everyone that is in the American family.